So we've made it to the end of my epic 3-part series ranking all 45 theatrically released DC movies from the worst to the best, and that means we're looking at the best 15 DC movies of all time. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your picks for the best DC movies of all time. My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Remember, this is part 3 of a 3-part series. You can check out the other parts right up here where I looked at the worst DC movies, the middle tier DC movies, and obviously today we're looking at the 15 best DC movies. With that said, let's get started. Number 15, Birds of Prey, and the unbelievably long title. Now, this is a movie that's a lot more polarizing than I was expecting. If it's not your cup of tea, fair enough. But I've never really understood just how much hate the internet throws at this movie. Now, I went into it expecting to not like it all that much because the trailers didn't really win me over, but the movie itself felt kind of like a smaller scale, street level crime story set in the world of DC, directed by Guy Ritchie, and that's interesting to me. Most importantly, it features cocaine. I do cocaine!
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Since the story's being told by Harley Quinn, you have an unreliable narrator who's telling everything with a bit of extra flair going into it. It's non-linear, it's hyperactive, and one of the nice touches is that they brought in the stunt team from the John Wick movies to enhance a couple of the action sequences. So in particular, the prison sequences are very cool. There's a chase at the end with Harley Quinn on roller skates with a car, and it's practical stunt work rather than a bunch of big CGI spectacle. And so it's a movie that far exceeded my expectations, and a movie that I still don't understand quite why everyone hates it. Number 14, A History of Violence, another movie that a lot of people don't realize is based off of a DC property, and a movie that I had never seen until last week. It was actually the last movie I watched while prepping for this video series, and it was such a pleasant surprise. It's kind of this slow burn thriller with these bursts of ultra violence. Tells the story of this mild-mannered diner owner in this small town who kills a couple of people in self-defense who are robbing his diner, and this just causes people to start looking into his past as to how he would be able to do this. And it's a great character study, amazing acting from beginning to end. It's not a big, flashy film. It's just a solid, slow burn action thriller. If you're into these kinds of things and haven't seen this one, definitely check it out. Next up, Shazam. 1 part superhero movie, 1 part big, and 1 part family drama, and all of it kind of works. Zachary Levi is absolutely perfect as this man-child superhero. He has a childish innocence and mischievousness to the way he's able to perform these scenes so that you believe that's the brain of a child in this adult's body. But what I think elevates this film is that when he's not Shazam, when he's back with the family at the house, those moments work just as well. It's a movie that legitimately has a heart to it where you care about the characters, the journey that he's on, and it's absolutely heartbreaking when he finds his real mother and she essentially rejects him and realizes that he didn't get lost, she abandoned him. There's a couple of problems in here. The tone gets a bit too dark in certain sequences, in particular where demons start biting people's heads off, and if that hadn't been the case, this one might have even been higher up on the list, but it's funny. It's got a great lead character, and it has a heart. Number 12, Wonder Woman. When I first heard that they were attempting to make a movie out of an Amazonian superhero who flies around in an invisible jet and swings around with a magic lasso and dresses in an outfit that looks like a skimpy version of the US flag turned into a bathing suit, I had no clue how they could pull that off without being too campy. And the second film kind of affirmed my fears. 10 years ago, even Joss Whedon had attempted to make his own version, and he couldn't crack the code. But Patty Jenkins managed to crack the code and tell a story that has thrilling, stylized action, an awesome score, a witty sense of humor, great chemistry between the leads, and kind of explores some ideas about man's inhumanity to man. The glue holding it all together is Gal Gadot, who just has this wonderful sense of strength and innocence at the same time. Once again, this is one that might have been higher up on the list, except the third act kind of drops the ball just a little bit. It gets very talky when you want things to get more exciting, and when the exciting stuff does happen, it's just kind of like big CGI generic fight once again. Apparently, Patty Jenkins' original version of the finale would have played out differently, but the WB wanted her to have something flashier, so we got something kind of generic at the end. In general, a movie that was so much better than I was expecting it to be, and a win on almost every level, except fully sticking the landing. Number 11, The Road to Perdition. After winning a whole bunch of Oscars for American Beauty, Sam Mendes decided to follow it up by adapting a graphic novel from a DC imprint called The Road to Perdition. The end result was an absolutely gorgeous period piece crime thriller starring Tom Hanks and a bunch of other familiar faces. It almost goes without saying, but the acting here from beginning to end is just absolutely top-notch. The cinematography is amazing. Sam Mendes intentionally wanted to tell a story through images rather than being dialogue heavy, and that's what he does here. And what makes it so profound is that it's such an intricately crafted story while being simplistic in another sense. The characters have these long histories with one another. They have deep ties to all these organizations, and so the story is about the unfolding of what if one piece and one cog broke in the system and it all started to collapse because of it. And it makes every interaction so deep, so fascinating, without needing to spell all of it out. There's a few issues here with the pacing. It takes like 45 minutes for the plot to fully kick in, and then it kind of quickly rushes through some of the more exciting things that happen in the middle. But in general, a great little crime thriller with deep themes about father-son relationships, the consequences of violence, and a movie worth checking out. Bringing us into the top 10, The Suicide Squad. After Disney decided to fire James Gunn over some tweets from over 10 years ago, WB snatched him up and set him loose to make whatever superhero he wanted to make, and the end result was an ultra-violent, wickedly funny version of The Suicide Squad. This is a movie that highlights James Gunn's strengths. He's very good at putting together these ensembles of outcasts and weirdos and forming a family out of them, telling a story filled with bizarre, strange characters, some of them very cartoonish, some of them barely speak any English, and somehow he finds the heart inside of it, so you actually care about the characters, but you also care about the group dynamic as a whole. Even as some of them is just morally repugnant as they are, you like them. They're endearing in their own ways. But where the movie really succeeds is it knows how to give each character emotional payoff. Whether it's a character who was experimented on by his mother to be a superhero and giving payoff to that journey, or Harley Quinn running off with a javelin and finding a very gross way to pay that off, or a father and his daughter who can't get along, but through the journey of this film, he earns his daughter's respect. There's so much satisfaction in the way that this movie ends. So it's got humor, it's got heart, it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's highly entertaining. Number 9, Superman 2, the theatrical and Richard Donner cuts. If you're not familiar with the backstory behind this movie, originally Superman 1 and 2 were being shot at the exact same time with Richard Donner as the director, but because they were going over budget and over schedule, they decided to stop shooting Superman 2 and just put all their effort into finishing Superman 1. When that was a massive hit and they greenlit Superman 2, the producers and Richard Donner were on very bad terms, and either they fired him or he decided not to return, so they brought in a different director to finish the movie. movie, but in order to be able to give a director credit for directing a film, they have to shoot over 50% of the film. So they had to reshoot a big gigantic chunk of Superman 2 in order for the director that finished Superman 2 to get credit for the film. And then 25 years later on DVD, they released Richard Donner's cut of the movie as best they could, since he didn't actually fully finish his version. So we have two different versions of this film. Now, had Richard Donner been able to truly complete his version of the film, I think it's safe to say that would have been the better version. But as is, I think each version has its flaws. But the idea of this movie is the perfect follow-up to Superman the movie. The physical threat is raised, the stakes are raised, because Superman has to face 3 different Kryptonians who want to take over the Earth. But on a personal level, Superman is deciding, does he want to be the hero Superman or the man Clark Kent and pursue love? So it just continues all of the story arcs of the first film while ratcheting up the tension, the emotion, and complementing the original so nicely. Unfortunately, Richard Donner couldn't properly complete his vision, so they brought in a director that doesn't really understand Superman and his powers, so the theatrical cut has a bunch of slapstick humor thrown into it, some wacky powers thrown into the third act, and with the Richard Donner cut, it recycles the ending of the first movie where Superman turns back time by spinning around the Earth, and some of it is test footage, so it's just not a complete film in a lot of ways. So a version that I wish I could put higher because I love this movie so much, but we have 2 flawed versions. Next up, Watchmen, Zack Snyder's adaptation of the most celebrated graphic novel of all time. At its core, it's a deconstruction of superhero stories and exploring the realities of what if people this powerful actually existed in the real world. If they were given autonomy to do whatever they wanted, how would that actually play out? What would the consequences of that be? And in doing so, tells this story where good and bad aren't exactly entirely clear. It's not easy to determine exactly what our heroes should and shouldn't do. And some of the people we're rooting for are pretty awful and do horrific, brutal things. And some of the people that are the actual villains are doing it for noble causes. It adds complexity to all of the characters, a relatability to everyone at the exact same time. Now, of course, Zack Snyder has a ability to adapt the imagery to the big screen. Some of Snyderisms might be a little bit too on display here with the use of the slow-mo and his favorite songs being strewn throughout the film. In particular, it's a little bit weird when Tom Waits is the background music for a sex scene. But all in all, an interesting, complex, epic superhero story that doesn't play into any of the tropes of the genre. A bunch of high-profile directors had actually been trying to adapt it to the big screen for 20 years before this movie came out. But in general, this is an epic superhero story that doesn't play neatly into any of the tropes of the genre, doesn't have any of the safe payoffs that you would expect, largely because it's pulling from some of the best source material and from a director with a nice visual flair. Number 7, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, the theatrical version of my favorite animated TV show of all time, as well as a Batman origin story over 10 years before Batman Begins came out. If you're familiar with your channel, you know I love origin stories. I absolutely love Batman. So when you take my favorite animated TV show of all time, the character of Batman, and make it an origin story, you're giving me everything that I absolutely love. It's a great study of Bruce Wayne and what makes him tick, the many directions that he's being pulled as a person. It manages to explore Bruce Wayne and what makes him tick, the many values that he has, and the fact that he's a real person that can be tempted away from his mission, and what would that look like. It manages to bring us a new villain while also incorporating in characters like the Joker. It gives Bruce Wayne a romance that you can buy into, that fits into our understanding of who Bruce Wayne is and how he would respond to actually finding love and happiness. The designs, the music of Batman, the animated series, were fantastic. Here, they're given a bigger budget, so they look even better, and the music sounds even more grand and orchestrated. And of course, for me, this is the definitive version of Batman as well as the Joker. When this movie came out, almost no one went to go see it in the theater except my sister and I opening weekend, and I've loved it ever since. Next up, Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's reimagining of Superman for the 21st century. This is a movie that took me a while to fully appreciate. In fact, had I done this ranking when the movie first came out, it would have been much lower down on the list because it took me a while to fully understand and appreciate the story that he was telling about Kal-El, Clark Kent, the person, and the themes being explored. At its core, it has so many more primal human emotions than people give it credit for. There's all these little details throughout the film that are so human that people miss because of the Snyderisms. Certainly on a superficial level, the movie abandons a bunch of the traditional Superman imagery and scenarios, but at its heart, it's trying to treat Superman as if he was a real person that arrived on Earth, and what would that person go through, especially at the point in time that he would choose to reveal himself, and what would cause him to do that. And finally, Hans Zimmer might be the top composer of the last 20 years, and I would argue this is his best score of all time. It elevates every single scene and perfectly fits the character as well as the movie, while not in any way trying to mirror what John Williams did over 40 years ago. When you put it all together, it's a fresh new take on a familiar character with a great lead performance, a director with an amazing visual flair, and a phenomenal score. It's a movie that every time I watch it, I like it even more. In fifth place, Batman Begins. After wowing the executives at the WB with Memento as well as Insomnia, they trusted him to revitalize the Batman franchise after Batman and Robin had tanked it for 7 years. And the end result for me is one of the best superhero movies of all time. And beyond that, a personal favorite superhero movie. I absolutely love origin stories, stories of becoming, and this is one of the absolute best ones because it's not about someone with superpowers. It's about a person with a mission and a purpose that dedicates all of their energy and their resources to going on this quest to becoming something different. And in the hands of Christopher Nolan, it's creative in how the story is told, and emotional in how it pays off. Top to bottom, the cast here is absolutely phenomenal. It's a movie that takes these characters and the genre seriously, and it finds a bunch of ways to have all of these big payoffs. As soon as you start getting to the middle of the film, every 15 minutes, there's some potent moment of emotion, all the way up into the finale when Rachel discovers who's behind the mask and what that means for her relationship with that person. So this is a movie I absolutely love. Number 4, Joker. At a time when the comic book movie genre was dominated by big spectacle films trying to outdo each other by going even bigger and more sensational, Todd Phillips decided to go in the opposite direction and tell a tragedy. A character study about a deeply broken man that the audience wants to see succeed, that wants to see him find his confidence and stop being bullied. But as you watch the story, you see he discovers that confidence through turning into a horrific monster, and it finds a way to both explore all of these ideas about society, about the treatment of the mentally unstable, while telling a compelling story. Top to bottom, the movie is jam-packed with phenomenal performances. Of course, Joaquin Phoenix is one of the top working actors today, and when you give him A character like this, he can just go to such dark and disturbing places, and he's someone willing to do that. Now, certainly in certain senses, this is Taxi Driver with a Joker skin around it, and even that comparison to a classic film from 40 years ago is what makes this movie so fresh and different inside of this genre. Almost every comic book movie these days ends with a big, gigantic CGI fight and a skybeam. And instead, this movie decided to be a character study, exploring what drives a man crazy, and how society deals with people like that. Or doesn't deal with people like that. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your picks for the best DC movies of all time. My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, a bunch of people are asking, what do I think about the mini animated DC movies? I actually did a ranking of the continuity that ran from Flashpoint Paradox to Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. You can check that video out right up here when this video is done, as well as the other parts in this series, or my ranking of all the Marvel movies. Check them out up here once this video is done. In third place, Zack Snyder's Justice League, a movie that I never thought that we would see this complete of a version of this film. But instead, they gave Zack Snyder $70 million to truly complete this film, and in doing so, revealed just how big of an abomination Justice League was back in 2017. Every single thing about this version of the film is better than that version of the film. This is Zack Snyder's magnum opus, the movie where he got to tell a big, epic story that takes its time to set up each of the characters, each of the plot points, and then slowly develops them, slowly adds complications so you understand everything taking place, how all the characters interact with one another, why they matter. The conflict in each scene is developed, fleshed out, so every piece matters in the story. So as you start moving into the second half, all the payoff is so rich, it's so satisfying because the movie was able to do the hard work of earning the moments that happen for the whole last, in the case of this movie, 2 hours of runtime. This is how you do a serious, dark, comic book movie epic properly. Our runner-up, Superman the movie, the godfather of the comic book movie genre, had its story originally written by the author of The Godfather. While there certainly were comic book movies that came out before Superman the movie, this is the first time that a producer said, let's do a big budget, serious adaptation of a comic book. According to Kevin Feige, before making any MCU films, he re-watches Superman the movie. Certainly, if you watch this movie for the very first time in 2021, the 43-year-old special effects are dated. Some of the humor, too campy. But if you compare this movie to the genre before it was created, it's an incredible triumph, especially if you look at the first 50 minutes as Richard Donner tells the epic story of the fall of Krypton, the upbringing of Clark Kent, and the transformation to Superman. It's treated with such reverence and respect. I am not exaggerating when I say this is the movie that's responsible for all comic book movies that have come since. Traditionally, in past videos, I have put this one in the #1 spot. It's just a personal favorite. It is #1. It is that important to me on a personal level. It is the movie that I grew up with. But if I'm being fair and I'm leveling criticisms against these movies the way I've leveled against other movies that I grew up with, there are some things with the story. Superman does turn back time by flying around the earth. So I decided I would bring it down just one spot. But in first place is The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's superhero epic that draws just as much from the comics such as The Long Halloween as it does from crime thrillers such as Heat, and in doing so creates something truly unique inside of the genre. From beginning to end, Nolan has crafted a thriller that has you at the edge of your seat. Whether you're talking about the scenes in and of themselves that manage to find conflict and tension, or the momentum of the story as a whole, it's just constantly winding up the tension, building up the conflict, so the ending pays off so well without it needing to be all about spectacle, because you care about the characters, you care about the city, and Nolan has made you care about the story itself. Now, of course, the standout performance that everyone talks about is Heath Ledger as the Joker, that finds a way to be terrifying, but sometimes still funny at the same time, especially when doing magic tricks. The movie's a triumph on almost every single level. It has the exciting action that you want from a comic book movie, while also just telling a great story about characters that you care about, and it manages to pull them all together into this stirring and swelling finale in the final moments that pays off the whole thing so well. There's a reason that people have been celebrating this as the greatest comic book movie of all time ever since it came out over 10 years ago. Because it's that good. Therefore, it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I've got more like it. You can see the 15 worst DC movies right over there. You can see my ranking of those DC animated films right over there, and my ranking of all 58 Marvel movies right down below me. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.